We post daily on Instagram, and that's the best way to contact us as well. Check us out at the Jungle Cabin. It's late, guys. We're going through our normal routine here at the Jungle Cabin. We've got quite a few animals to feed here. Obviously, it is a big commitment when you do take on animals, especially when you do have a lot of them. We've got different routines for feedings, and as you can see, different animals like to eat different things. So you probably clicked on this video because you want to see some tarantulas. We're going to be feeding tarantulas dubia roaches, Blaptica dubia. We do breed these here at the Jungle Cabin, so these are homegrown. There is a reason that we choose dubia roaches over other feeders, but there are quite a few different ones that you can choose from. We're going to do a separate video on that, so check that one out. Anyway, let's take a look at some tarantulas. So what I've got here, excuse the glare, is gooty ornamental, people like to call it. It's Poecilotheria metallica. It's not your average kind of tarantula, not one that I'd recommend to beginners, but we're going to get into that. And we're going to talk a little bit about the care and do a feeding vid. Care for tarantulas is pretty much the same throughout, so let's get into it. So as you can see, I've got my tarantula in a glass enclosure here. This one was actually made by Custom Aquaria. I'm going to link them down in the description. They can make literally anything you want, guys, and this is what we'd call an arboreal setup. Like I say, tarantulas are pretty much the same in terms of husbandry throughout, but we can break them up into certain categories to make things a little bit easier. So the categories that I'm referring to there are New World and Old World. First of all, New World tarantulas, they tend to have a little bit of a poorer venom, a weaker venom. It's not very strong. They have urticating hairs, which are hairs on the abdomen, which I'll tell you more about as well. And Old World tarantulas, they tend to have more potent venom. It tends to be a lot faster as well. The second way that we can classify spiders is by arboreal or terrestrial. So arboreal means that they like to climb, basically, in layman's terms. What that means for yourself as a keeper is you want to provide an enclosure such as this one. It's going to be taller than it is wide. Like I say, their instinct is to go straight up. Good to have a side opening enclosure as well for an arboreal spider, because like I say, their instinct is to fly straight up if they do get disturbed or scared. And obviously, if you're opening the lid from the top there, you're soon going to cause yourself some problems. Terrestrial spiders are the opposite. They want to be in something that is longer than it is tall. And that just means that they tend to spend a lot of the time on the ground, on the sub, or maybe digging into the sub as well. So when we're talking about care of tarantulas, it's actually easier to go over some of the myths, and we'll dispel some of that, because there's a lot of kind of confusion around keeping these tarantulas and how it should be done properly. Obviously, we've touched on it briefly at the beginning of the video. Part of being responsible for your animals is doing a massive amount of research before you even dream of buying them. And you can find a lot of misinformation out there on the internet about spiders. So here's a few points. So you might hear people say that with a tarantula you want to provide a water dish. That is bang on. Most animals that we do keep, we want to give them a constant access to water. Tarantulas don't necessarily need it because they do get a lot of moisture from the actual things that they eat, and they can also go a very long time without water as well. But I do like to provide them with water. We actually use just a small bottle cap there, nice and easy. We're going to make that a little bit bigger as the tarantula does grow, but a lot of people are going to tell you that you actually need to put a sponge in that water dish to stop your tarantula from drowning. I'm going to tell you straight away, it's not actually possible. Tarantulas cannot drown. They are built in such a way that the hairs that surround all of their body keeps them afloat on the water surface. Next time your tarantula molts, if you want to test this out, you can actually try and put it under some water, the molt, push it under there, pour water on top of it. You'll see once you take it out of the water, it is still completely dry. So it's not possible for your tarantula to actually drown in a water dish, so don't worry about that. The other bad thing about putting a sponge in your water dish, not only is it not necessary, it's a breeding ground for bacteria. Obviously, if you keep fish, then you'll know we put sponges inside of filters because they're a great breeding ground for bacteria. Now, we don't really want that within a tarantula enclosure. It's just going to cause mold and probably poor health within our animals as well. The next point I want to cover is the size of the enclosure. So just for a little bit of scale, there's my hand. It's not huge, just compared to the spider, tarantula. And there's actually quite a lot of room. I'm expecting this one to molt soon, so it's going to be getting a little bit bigger. And I think it can do 1 or 2 more molts. We'll see how it goes within this enclosure before I do actually need to upgrade. I raised this tarantula and all of my tarantulas in these. It's a 32-ounce cup. We'll put a sub in here, around about 1 inch or 2, and provide them with a hide as well. And that will actually do them for quite a long time. This is what we'd call juvenile. It's not huge. We measure tarantulas by the diagonal width of the leg span. And before a spider is a juvenile, we're going to call it a sling, spiderling. You can buy tarantulas as juvies, slings, or as adults. I like to buy them at a small juvie stage, which means I can see quite a few molts through within this 32-ounce cup. But if you're buying yourself a sling, you'd actually get it in a very small vial, around about this size, or maybe even a test tube, some cotton, such as the one that we saw in our last video about ants. You do not need, guys, to put your tarantula into a huge enclosure like this Poecilotheria here. Not huge, but in comparison to the animal. It's just going to mean that it's going to be harder for that tarantula to actually find food. The other thing with Poecilotherias is they have got a mesh top. Right on the tips of the feet, they've got tiny little hooks. We need kind of a micro lens, which we are going to be breaking out soon to see something like that. It's very easy for those claws to actually get caught up in that mesh, and it's not fun to have to try and remove a spider from that kind of situation, especially one like this that you don't really want to catch a bite from. I've actually got ventilation here in this enclosure, which is important for spiders. You want to provide them with cross ventilation, so coming through the front, exiting out the back here. As you can see, we've actually got this wooden panel in place here. It does allow for air to pass over the top of it. As you can see, I've got a little bit of a gap there and in between, and that's allowing good cross ventilation. If I didn't have this wooden panel here, I would want to put some kind of plastic and punch some holes in it over this, just so the spider hasn't got access to that wire. That's going to maintain, a perfect kind of humidity that this spider is going to be happy with, and also it's not going to encourage a massive amount of mold or kind of critters living within that sub as well. It's really hot where I am at the moment, which is another reason why I do like to provide all of my animals with a constant source of water. If you give this a quick blast, the temperature going at the moment, this enclosure is running at 80 degrees, so it's a little bit higher than it would be normally, but like I say, this is a tropical kind of animal. It's not going to be bothered by that at all. Now, I see a lot of people putting heat mats down underneath the enclosure or on the side of the enclosure, or even using heat lamps hanging above as well. Totally unnecessary for a spider. It's going to kill your spider as well. Don't bother with it, especially if it's a burrowing animal. Those kind of tarantulas, when it is too hot for them, what they want to do is burrow down into the sub where it is nice and moist and cooler. And if you've got a heat mat underneath your enclosure, it's obviously just making the situation worse. The one and only time that we're going to be putting a heat mat or any kind of additional heating onto an enclosure is if your house is really, really cold for whatever reason. If your heating's out, if you're doing some kind of refurbishments at the moment, and you're just not at that normal temperature. In those kind of situations, a lot of people, they've got quite a few tarantulas. We're going to go over that a bit as well. And what I'd recommend doing is heating one cupboard or one area rather than individual enclosures, because like I say, tarantulas, they don't really like or need additional or excessive heat. Next issue I want to cover, and one that we do see a lot of people talking about on the internet as well, in forums, on Facebook, etc., is my tarantula is holed up, we like to call it. So what will happen sometimes, these tarantula won't be out and about as this one is at the moment, giving us a nice show. It's going to be in your cork bark. It will probably seal off the top of this hole here and around the bottom, any kind of areas, and it will be completely sealed in there. Now, the mistake a lot of people make is being trying to be good keepers, trying to make sure that their animal's all right, and they'll actually break that seal of web, and they'll try and investigate. They'll try and have a look. They might even try and force some food down there. Now, what's most likely going on is your tarantula is actually getting ready to molt, which means it is going to grow, it's going to shed off its exoskeleton, and it's going to emerge bigger. Now, the last thing that you want to do in that period is disturb that spider or that tarantula. So just leave well alone in those kind of circumstances. Tarantulas have been known to go without food for literally months and months and months and months on end. So really don't worry about it. And that's another time and again, the best thing that you can do if you do want to kind of do anything at all is make sure that water dish is nice and topped up, so when it does emerge, might be a little bit dehydrated and want a drink at that time. And the last thing that I want to cover in terms of kind of myths or controversial issues surrounding tarantulas is handling. Now, me myself, my personal opinion, is an animal for looking at, not for touching. The spider doesn't actually benefit at all from you actually handling it, and you're at a danger of getting bit. Like I say, you don't particularly want to get a bite from this one. Another misconception that you'll hear a lot is a spider bite is just like a bee sting. So you only need to worry about it if you are actually allergic to bee stings. There's over 900 actual known species of tarantulas, as well as unknown species as well. And on top of that, everyone reacts differently to different things. So it's not something worth risking, in my opinion, especially with some of these with a little bit of a worse venom than others. If you do get bit by your tarantula, which is likely, it can happen for no reason at all, just while you are handling, then most people's first reaction is to fling the spider or fling the hand just as a reaction. The spider's going to go flying and it's going to be quite a big splat on your wall. That abdomen there is like a water balloon, it's quite fragile. A fall, or like I say, any kind of accidental drop or knock, and that's quite easily burst, which is going to kill your tarantula. I touched on it briefly earlier as well, in terms of the way that spiders or tarantulas do defend themselves, is urticating hairs. Now, urticating hairs, you tend to find them on the New World spiders or tarantulas that don't tend to have more potent venom, and it's another defense mechanism. They can actually use these back legs here to kick hairs off the abdomen. Some tarantulas, as we know, are quite hairy, and those hairs, they can fly up into the air and they can attach into your skin. You can actually turn you blind as well if they get in your eyes, and they're extremely irritating and itchy. It's not a pleasant experience, I've been told. I've not actually experienced it myself, luckily enough, but like I say, that's because I just don't handle my tarantulas. I've seen them kicking hairs before, during rehouses or when I might have been messing around inside the enclosure, but nice and easy to obviously just close up the lid and we're not affected. But it can be quite a serious thing, so if you do insist on handling your tarantulas, just look out for that as well. Shout out to Warren Spiders, who sent us some footage of his white knee. He's going to be starting up a movement soon, so look out for that one. Sorry about the glare, guys. So what we're seeing here is what a lot of people like to call in the hobby the happy dance. You see him kind of spinning around in a circle, dabbing his abdomen. And what it's doing there is just laying down a very thin layer of silk that it's going to use to eat that food on. So in the wild, that's going to discourage, isopods, ants, other things like that interfering with it while it's trying to eat. But yeah, happy dance is what people like to call that one.